the vocab and the grammar. You've got that kind of like, well, how should it function? What, I suppose that's where like the drag and drop coding stuff is a great kind of onboarding for
like Scratch.
Yeah, I think it's processed without the hassle of having to know the is it a colon or a semicolon I put at the end or
Yeah. Well, that's one of the problematic things with coding, isn't it? It's those little things. I mean, I think I've mentioned before. I mean, my introduction to computers was ZX81 back a very, very long time ago. And
I'm not making the joke.
We couldn't afford to get games and things. So you'd get a weekly magazine, and there'd be literally 4 or 5 pages of code, which you just religiously sit down and copy out. And it'd be like you'd go around a mate's house. I mean, I used to go up to a friend's house, and we'd be kind of, one of us would read out, the other one would be entering the code. And if you missed a full stop, you get to the end and it wouldn't run. It'd be like just an error come up, and you then have to kind of go through and try and debug it, which is actually it's good skills, and it's kind of having to be precise about what you're doing is it's good. It's a good lesson to learn, but it was so frustrating.
Yeah,
so frustrating, and the power supplies were a little bit unstable at times as well. So knock the power supply in, just all your code's gone before you can save it, even though it's wrong. I mean, you could save incorrect code as well, but it was,
I think like a lot of things like that. There's because they're like tiered languages, like assembler and binary and stuff like that. That are just like the base code that the computer understands. But as you build on more and more sort of layers on top, you get to that kind of like Scratch where you're just dragging boxes and connecting lines up to things in a visual interface. They'll kind of translate back down to the base code, but obviously each level you put on it is making it more and more accessible for a wider audience, and sort of reducing that requirement of having a computer science degree or something like that. Whereas now you can just hand a small circuit board to a group of 5-year-olds and say, drag these boxes here until it does the shapes that you want it to do.
Yeah, and I studied engineering, and I was still intimidated to learn a new coding language on my own because, I was surrounded by computer science students who were trying to work for Tesla and Google and everything else, and I was like, they're all like 5 years ahead of me. That's not my world. I don't need to.
It's intimidating, isn't it?
The buddy I was hanging out with was like, no, that's the worst way to think. Just do it. I know you'll be good. And I was like, okay, I'll trust. And it's nice having those friends who can just kind of push you in the right direction. Be like, great. I don't really know what the application is at this point, but I was reading an article about some inventor, and it talked about him coming from a computer science background, but also working on a lot of physical things. He felt very much like a quintessential maker, like a maker inventor. It was prototyping things with 3D printing in his little machine shop in his basement. But then it was also talking about the digital projects he worked on. And reading those parts of it, I was feeling slightly uncomfortable because I don't have those skill sets in my own resume. And I was like, wow, that's probably a good signifier that it's something I should work on. I don't need to feel othered from that whole world.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is it's getting that, realizing that you can be who you are without having to have all that other stuff as well. Your place in it is just as valid as someone with that, that full portfolio online or a physical portfolio as well. You can still be a completely valid entity in your own right. But if that is sort of a thing you want to add to your thing, it's it's a bolt-on addition that's only going to bolster everything, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's also just for my own personal growth, working on the it's so stupid because I'm only 24, but sometimes I get stuck in a mindset of these are the things that I know and this is my world. But it's such a bad mindset to be in. I should be learning more things, and I love learning, but it's easy to fall into a negative mindset around learning new things.
Yeah,
You have to
definitely.
think bigger.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good reminder. I look at it every day. Turn it on, think about it.
But I
Although
think
for
it's
anyone else watching,
go
it's
on.
just thin-er at the minute.
Yeah, we've realized that in Clamp, like how many different words are actually contained in there, depending on where I put my head. It's amazing. It's like a game of Wordle right behind me.
Yeah, or which version of Wordle? Because there's so many versions of it now.
I don't know. I just started
Yeah.
playing it yesterday. I'm like a contrarian with that. I'm like, oh, this thing's popular on Twitter. I don't want to do that.
I think they
And
got
then I
it
come
hipster.
into it after it's popular, and it's late.
I think I'm doing 4 different versions of it at the moment. There's Wordle, which I did stop for a while. When it went to New York Times, when they took over officially, and they changed the URL, it lost my streak, and I had a really good streak.
Oh, those bastards.
Oh, I just go back to the
And I lost
same.
it.
I go back to the same URL, the original one, and it still pulls.
I was trying to do
everything
that,
through.
but I lost my streak. I literally was just had the same page going. So every day I just keep the page open on my phone, and
It's so funny that
dozens
it's
of
like
tabs.
such a cultural phenomenon, and it's a web page. Like,
Yeah,
they probably have no incentive to make it into an app, but it's hilarious to me that it's like Flappy Bird. And like when Flappy Bird was super popular, and then they took it off the App Store, and people like were selling those phones for $1,000 that still had Flappy Bird installed.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I was
God, I
thinking
forgot all
about
about
kind of what you're saying there about kind of the sort of picking up coding or whatever. And there's that. I'm reading a book. It's going to be one of my attention grabbers. Is a book called Range, which I can't remember who's by now. It might be David Epstein. And it's talking about kind of the difference between sort of specialists and generalists, and how that might be. I'm not very far into it, but it's quite fascinating already. And it's that sort of thing for me. And I've talked about before on Thoughts of the Tinkerage about kind of the idea of jack of all trades, and I very much consider myself a jack of all trades. I'm not really good at anything. The thing I'm probably best at, kind of overall, is teaching physics, because that's the thing that I did as a career, and so I've got the 10,000 hours in easily. And
Those
but
poor kids.
I'm very much a generalist. I know a lot or a little about a lot. So I know, and which sometimes it's very frustrating, because sometimes I'll maybe dive into a conversation on a forum somewhere, whether it's Discord or whether it's kind of like one of the sort of Make a Waffles offshoot type WhatsApp groups. And there'll be something coming up, and there'll be phrases coming up, and go, yeah, I know that word. I don't really know what that thing is.
You need to get that point where you can recognize a word and then think, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Because I think you and I
do
both
that a
suffer
lot,
from that
actually.
same.
Yeah, I do that quite a bit, because there are things I kind of think, I know of that. And I'd like to get to know more about it, but there's only so much time in the day. But I'm also aware that I think one of my, in a way, strengths, whether those in my career or kind of just sort of generally, is the fact that I am a generalist, a jack of all trades. And so I do know a lot about it, so I can make connections between things. But I know plenty of people, and I think there's quite a significant number of people in the maker community who are very much specialists in perhaps one thing.
Yeah.
We see this on YouTube. The people who only do wood on their channel, or they only do 3D printing, or they only do electronics, or they only do insert any other sort of making medium.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Morley, I think I think I discovered you just as you got your 3D printer, and then now every time I open up Reddit, I see it. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's another Morley one.
Yeah.
Or the same with like the leatherwork projects and stuff.
It's been a game changer, definitely. I feel like however though, in some ways I feel like I've been leaning on it a little heavily. like for example, this I'm using my 3D printed Wobie jig right now, which was a fun project, and it was kind of just like a challenge to myself of like, can I make that as a 3D printed version? And I did, and I could, and it turned out really cool. But it's functionally not as useful as the wooden version because it's plastic and everything's a little bendier and it's a little shaky. It's great as a microphone stand; it works very well, but it's sort of like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and so I think it's been an amazing process with it. But like I can get sort of stuck in like this is what I have, so I must use that thing to make something.
I very much feel that on in the core. Everything is a CAD and 3D printing project to me.
Yeah,
I have to remember that it's like, oh no, I can do other things.
Yeah, but is that not an example? Perhaps sometimes when we have a constraint, we have to be more creative. Doesn't matter what that constraint is, whether it's time, money, materials, some sort of, for want of a better word, handicap, or a lack of knowledge, or insert any other possible constraint. Could you, for example, you say you're overusing it, but could it not maybe be thought of as the fact that you have a 3D printer and you don't have a huge workshop full of machine tools, lathes, table saw, insert other lot of tools, that becomes a constraint where you're seeing, well, can I solve this problem? Can I do this with this?
Yeah, I think it's been fantastic, and it's allowed me to learn a lot about 3D printing through, for example, I think I posted on my story yesterday, I was 3D printing this huge thing that took over my entire print bed. And it was essentially a hoop that I could clip onto the side of my desk to hold my little trash can that I have in here. Because when it's on the floor, the puppy gets into it. She tries to eat random stuff and we have to pull it out of her mouth. And so it's not helpful on a table because that's taking up very valuable horizontal surfaces. Yeah. So I had it kind of like clamped to my desk, and I was like, oh, this is a great functional 3D printing solution. So I printed it about a third of the way and the print failed. I actually accidentally hit the reset button. That was the first time I've ever done that. I was like, wow, that was way too easy. I feel like that's a bit of a design flaw. So I took it off the bed and like kind of put the trash can into it to test the fit. And it was so bendy. And I realized all of a sudden, I was like, oh, this is really not the best solution for this. But I wouldn't have, figured that out if it weren't through the trial and error. So I'm not, I don't regret all the 3D printing projects I've done or like feel bad about it. I think it was a lot of valuable learning experiences, but I'm sort of at the point now where I'm like able to think bigger a little bit and realize like, okay, so like I've learned a lot about like what this tool can do. And now I have a better sense of like where it's a proper application or where, a different material might work better. But yeah, as a constraint, like with leather stamps, a lot of people do them like with CNC or like lino cutting or whatever else. But just because that was the thing I had and I was into leatherworking, it made this really nice marriage of techniques, which has since become like very popular video on my channel because everyone's like, oh, that's a cool way to marry these two accessible crafts.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's the thing, because that was relatively early on in my getting a 3D printer. Was I think one of the first people who'd done a leather stamp with a 3D printer. A friend of mine shared it and went, "Is this something you could actually use?" Like, holy shit, yeah, that's a really good idea. And there still doesn't seem to be too many people doing it, but it is a perfect solution for it because it's so much quicker and easier and more accessible to get a 3D printer now, and to then be able to make a custom stamp for that. It just seems like a really sensible thing to do.
I think it's also two disparate worlds, whereas I think of a lot of leather crafters are largely older and probably have never used a 3D printer before. And a lot of people with 3D printers are, I mean, obviously you guys 3D print, but like a lot of them are my age or younger. At least a large proportion of the population. So
I think perhaps yes, the 3D printers are perhaps very accessible to younger people. I wouldn't say it's necessarily just younger people that 3D print. But I think
yeah,
the technology,
not
the age of the technologies, leatherworking has been around for thousands of years, and there hasn't until the kind of the invention of the sewing machine. It probably hasn't really changed much in those few thousand years.
I mean, in fairness, the saddler that I know, I mean, it blew his mind when I handed him some 3D printed stuff, and he's similar age to me. He's not that much older. He's only in his early 40s at the oldest, and that kind of blew his mind, just seeing a 3D printed thing. And it wasn't. I hadn't even shown him any of the printed stamps yet. But even still, having sewing machines and stuff, he'll still quite happily just churn through all of his work, just in using old tools and old techniques. Even as a young guy, it's just kind of having that higher level of technology isn't necessarily better for what he does. So I think there's that kind of sort of tech savvy people who are more likely to have a 3D printer might then do leatherworking as something to like being in the IT industry. For me, it's leatherworking is a creative outlet using my hands, versus someone who does leatherworking for a living for their career isn't necessarily as likely to then pick up a 3D printer.
Right.
So I think it's the direction of that funneling back through, and I think the older 3D printing users who've been building the 3D printers for 10, 15 years might not necessarily be into leatherworking as much. So I think it is niche enough in both respects that the Venn overlaps is a relatively small section.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's finding those overlaps, isn't it? I think that's the thing. I mean, I think about if you go into probably a lot of schools, thinking sort of UK, probably quite a few have a 3D printer nowadays. They have to talk about additive manufacturing. It's on the curriculum. It will be on the kind of the exam curriculum for sort of 16-year-olds. So have a 3D printer around. It's a great thing to have going when you've got an open evening. But of course, they are generally quite slow. You can't really use them with a class very easily. You might have a student use them as part of another project, but to have a class of students sort of designing something and then printing it out on a 3D printer is fairly cumbersome.
Yeah, we do it at the STEAM project, and it's tricky. I mean, we have it's like a kid focused makerspace where I work, but we have 20 3D printers, so it makes it a little easier. But even then, it's striking a balance of the whole project management part of it, where it's like getting the files from the computer to each individual printer. It's interesting too how I'm sure some printers have it less cumbersome, but at least with the ones we have, it's still just take the flash drive, put it in your computer, upload the G code, bring it to the computer, scroll. There's not a very seamless way to do it. I'm sure there's printers where you can hook it up to the internet and everything else, but I feel like we have a good sense of the size of thing you need to get a 30-minute print, which is perfect for a class, and then they get that instant gratification.
With 20 printers as well, you can just set them all off at 5 minutes apart for the same model. So, over the course of an evening.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Do something as a demonstration, you can at least see. This is it now. This is it in 10 minutes time. This, for people who are just kind of passing through.
Yeah, I miss the novelty of 3D printing. I remember the first few times I saw 3D printed objects, and I was like, "This is so cool!" It's amazing how this was made. But I don't get it at all anymore. I would say
buy a Delta printer.
What is that?
Delta printer, instead of having the Prusa's are the bed moves and the head moves. A Delta is it's a swinging cradle with 3 pairs of arms that come out. And it's the entire motion system is all curves, so it has three vertical
polar
pillars.
geometry rather than Cartesian.
Yeah, so the watching those print is, I mean, I've had a Delta printer since 2017, I think, and I can still sit and watch an entire print on that, even though the other four printers could quite happily be printed away and I can just ignore them. But when that Delta is printing, it's just absolute witchcraft, just seeing this thing, this cradle just sort of hanging and just swinging around all over the place.
Now, is there a technical advantage to the Delta printers over like a Cartesian one?
Yes, depending on what you're printing. Because something like a bed slinger, like a Prusa Mark III sort of thing, obviously you've got that moving mass. So on the Delta, the build plate stays static, so they can move a lot faster because it's just a swinging mass. Because you've got three motors controlling that movement, they can stop and change direction very quickly as well. So you tend to get fewer artifacts on the outside of the print, and they're really good for things that are cylindrical or organic, more so than...
Dang, that sounds right up my alley. I might need to get one of those.
New printer on the way.
There you go.
And that was me going to ask you, if you're getting a bit bored now, you're not getting that thrill from the 3D printing. What's your next fix going to be? Have you got anything in mind yet? But it looks like could be the Delta.
yeah, there's that. I don't know. I think actually, when I think about like getting a fix through making, like for novelty, I think the main thing I'm thinking about right now is trying to do a span of making a video a day for some period of time. It was something I was thinking about doing last year, but I kind of forgot about it. And then I remembered it again recently, and I kind of was like, okay, I kind of feel ready to do this. I think this is a perfect time to try to take 5 days and take a video every day. So I'm very excited about that, novelty wise, just to see what sort of creative outputs I could do with that and how it will change and affect my style and help me become less perfectionist. But in terms of making things, I mean, there's like, I'm working from a skeleton crew here. Like I would love to get a router. A router would be great. And it's nice. Like any small tool upgrade I have is a massive level up for me at the moment, because I'm like I said, relative skeleton crew. I'm getting a new office chair. That's going to be great. I'm sitting in like this old wooden chair right now with a blanket to try to support my lumbar. I'm building a fold down desk behind me. Like I'm trying to really get this space a lot more ergonomic and like visually interesting. So yeah, but in terms of fit, like mediums, now that I've worked at the Steam project, the first time seeing a laser cutter there, we were just cutting out circles, and I was having a ball watching that. And it's still fun to watch sometimes, but even that novelty wears off really quickly.
Yeah. I think it's like that with everything though, isn't it? Anything, any kind of automated machine that's fantastical when you first go at it, it's got to have something really, really special to keep that novelty there. I suppose something like a laser is fantastical, but it's still producing you something very quickly, and that going through those motions, that repetition is more likely to happen quickly than it would for something that you don't use particularly often.
Yeah, and I think it's also just one small part of like what is satisfying about making things. Like that novelty is cool and is nice, but I think what is so much more powerful is like the longer term satisfaction and the empowerment that comes from being able to like make your ideas reality, to quote another podcast. And just knowing like being like, I can build that thing that we want. I can looking back a year ago, I can make bigger and larger and more ambitious things now than I could then. The feeling of progression. But that novelty is just like, that's the little icing that kind of just draws you in to the larger cake.
But then you need a bigger fix.
Yeah,
every time. I think it's making. I've heard others describe it this way. It's like a drug. Yeah, people talk about sort of gateway drug into making.
It's all dopamine, isn't it?
Yeah, it's dopamine hits. But I want to go back. You talk about sort of a video a day. Now I know you spend quite a bit of time editing your videos
Yeah.
and going to quite a lot of sort of trying to get you pick the right music, getting the kind of sort of changes, the transitions, the sort of actions within a shots to sort of time with the beat and things like that. I mean, if you're doing a video a day, is that something that you're maybe going to have to relax on?
Definitely. And I think it will be good. I think it will help me focus on what is important for a given video and focus more on story, which is something I would like to try to do more of. I don't see doing it for any long amount of time. I would like to try for 5 days and then see where I'm at that 5-day point, and then maybe keep it going. But I don't know. It's I think a theme that I've been kept talking about is like it's easy to get into a rut, and I like things that will break me out of that. And any intensive experience I've gone through has always been very beneficial. Like we did a design challenge in university called Timber Fever, and I was going to school in Montreal at the time, and this took place in Toronto. And it was a 3-day design to build competition between architecture and engineering students. And you had to build a wooden structure that fit a prompt. And the prompt for that year was to build a water station. So it was like in the summer, like a hydration station, and to integrate certain materials. And you had to have this whole, design brief. And it was super fast paced. It was stressful. Like I slept terribly each of those nights because I was just like, okay, we gotta fix this issue. We gotta fix that issue. Like we gotta build that tomorrow. But it was very like type 2 fun in that I got a lot out of it. First time really like working with architects and seeing the like difference between those two mindsets of like the architecture and engineering. Those short-term, high intensity learning experiences is one thing I kind of see it as. And I think when I look at my own videos, sometimes I feel like they're too sterile, and I would like to inject a little more of like genuineness or my own personality, or not trying to make it feel so something, which I don't even know if it's worth making it seem that whatever ideal I'm going towards. So to just sort of break me out of what I'm doing. And the other thing I was thinking about when I was considering this idea is the most entertained I've ever been by YouTube videos was by daily vlogs. So it was the Corridor Digital and Freddie W. I don't know if they were like when they were in the same building putting out daily videos, and back in like 2012 or whatever. Those and Jacko's daily videos.
I was going to say, when you were talking about the daily videos, Jacko and David Welder doing their daily video challenge.
Yeah. So that one, and then his more recent one as well. I don't know if that was daily or just it felt daily. I think it was daily. The more recent one he did when they were doing other stuff.
I tend to think of like Casey Neistat with sort of daily videos.
Yeah, so I got to Casey Neistat super late in the game. Like I've been aware of him obviously forever, but I only started watching his videos like recently. And as I've also been going through the whole Van Neistat catalog.
Yeah, I've got. I don't think I'm subscribed to Casey at the moment. I was.
Yeah, I don't think he's put out a new video in at least a few months.
Yeah, or maybe it's just he hasn't put video, because I know he's had several really quite significant breaks while he's been working on other projects and not doing. I don't know if he went to LA and then he's back out in New York. I don't even know where he's at the moment.
I'm not sure. I'm not a fan necesserically, so I don't know where he is in the world. I mean, I don't mean to say that I'm throwing any shade. Like, I really liked his stuff, but like, I'm not a fan. I don't know what his current situation is.
I'm not his audience. I know that.
I need to. Yeah. I feel like I need to be careful sometimes when I say things that like I don't mean it in like a mean way. I said that when we had Bob on Clamp from I Like to Make Stuff in the after show. I couldn't remember David Pacito's name, like when I was listing the three of them in the podcast, and I was like, yeah, like you, Jimmy, and the other one, and I felt terrible saying it, to the point where at the end I need to be like, I just want to be clear, like that wasn't malicious anyway. I had a brain fart. I couldn't remember what his name was.
I think we all go through that.
Yeah. And I think he
occurs when you
understood.
get older.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm not Casey Neistat's audience, but I really like kind of the the making aspect of things. He and Van as well. That kind of connection to Tom Sachs, the kind of the studio approach. I've got Tom Sachs is something I find fascinating. Again, am I the audience? No, I'm probably not the audience, particularly now with all the work he's doing with NFTs. I find some aspects
poor
of
to
Tom
be his
Sachs's
audience.
work. Yeah, I'm too old. Yeah. I find some aspects of Tom Sachs' approach to things dangerously cult-like. I don't know if that's
Yeah, I
maybe
know what you
going
mean.
too sort of far. And
Yeah, it's like
he almost
you're
describes
finding it difficult.
self-describes as a cult.
Yeah, it's like difficult to find the border between like reality and the art. And I think when
Yeah.
when it's hard to draw that boundary, it starts to become a little uncomfortable.
But I find aspects of Tom Sachs's work, which reflects then in Casey and in Van, that deliberate thought of to process why am I doing this, having those kind of the 10 bullets, for example, which I think is a fascinating
Great video.
list. And there's various different versions of it. Even if you go through Tom's back catalogue, there are different versions
Ooh,
of the 10
I didn't
bullets.
know that.
Yeah, there are some slight differences. And I don't know if that was kind of a deliberate deviation or evolution, or whether it was more just we have these things and sometimes they change, which again is okay. It's okay to sort of change practice, and I find that quite that kind of almost deliberate approach. We're going to have these 10 things that are the backbone to everything we do in this studio. I find that quite fascinating, and I'm still kind of, even though I've known about Tom Sachs now for well over 10 years, and I find it fascinating, and I'm still debating whether that gives good constraint or bad constraint.
Well, I feel like
constraint can be either.
I feel like for his studio, it's almost necessary, because as an artist, he has a very particular aesthetic and style, and he needs that to come through in his art, but he has other people who are working with him. So I totally understand why he would need to make guidelines like that. Or I also think about, they made another video about color, about these are the colors we use in the Tom Sachs studio. And it's like brand guidelines, right? He has a brand, he has like, he needs that. And if that were to change, it wouldn't be Tom Sachs anymore. I'm sure Andy Warhol had a similar thing, right? When he had how many people working at his factory in New York City?
No idea, but huge numbers, yeah.
Or maybe he didn't.
It's brand guidelines is exactly what it is, and it's that again in and of itself has been around for as long as there have been brands. It's standardization of a production facility. That's exactly what he is, isn't he? Essentially, is it's productionized art.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of thinking about it. Yeah, it is very, but it's also there's aspects of almost spirituality to the art as well, which I think is possibly slightly counter to the idea of productionized. But then maybe that's discipline. If you think of the way a monk might go through a very deliberate, very timed day. Everything is timed to the minute. Everything is laid out, exactly what they're going to do. Getting up at this time, going to prayers, doing tasks, having meals, everything laid out, prescribed, particular day.
I can't imagine like being an artist with such a particular style and having a staff, to help you produce that. Like, I don't know, do they have any creative input, or are they just labor? I have no idea. It's such a particular world that I have no real exposure. I mean, I've worked in design teams, but not in the highly creative sense of it.
Yeah.
Well, I
that'd be
think
interesting.
you know, in a design team, especially like in the engineering world, you still have, well, they're not brand guidelines as such, but they're engineering guidelines, aren't they? You know,
Mhm.
there is still that room for creativity, but like you say, whether or not there is room for that creativity for someone like Tom Sachs, who has that spiritualized, culty kind of thing. Maybe that is where creativity gets stamped out and the brand guidelines become the overarching rules.
Mhm. I don't know. I'm
That's a
sure it would be
philosophical art.
fascinating to intern at his studio. I'm sure that would be a wonderful experience. I mean, maybe not wonderful in the like blissful way, but a very good learning and growing experience.
Something good to look back on, you mean?
Yeah, type 2 fun.
Yeah.
I think it probably would be. I suspect. Yeah, it's one of those sort of things. If you are expected to, you've got to sweep for a month before we'll even let you do anything else, and then you're going to spend. I don't know what the processes are for the intern, but I do know there are kind of from things I've seen, all sort of menial tasks. You've almost got to start by here's a tray of assorted screws. You're going to sort them, and it's tens of thousands of screws. Yeah, very kind of
What
sort
we're
of
saying is
menial.
he's actually just a parent.
I think at any job you need those menial tasks to get you started. I mean, I think that's where a lot of learning comes through. So I think I wasn't completely honest or hadn't thought of everything earlier when I said that I haven't done that sort of highly creative work in design teams, because I'm kind of doing that right now in that I'm doing content creation for the Steam project, and I'm producing this video for them about like, how do kids learn when they come to the Steam project? Why should I sign my kid up for any of our programs? So it's like a parent has heard about us, they want to know more, and so they watch this video to hear about like what sort of things the kids will do and what sort of things they'll learn and how it's different from school and other clubs. And so, I wrote a script and we recorded this video, and now I'm inserting all this B-roll into it. So, this video could take millions of different forms. It's very much influenced by my own style and coming from a YouTube background. There's some quick cuts with B-roll, but it's the director's vision at the end of the day. Like, this business is his baby, it's his vision. And so it's kind of like I'll run it by him, and we have conversations back and forth about things that might be good. But at the end of the day, it's like, if this is what the video needs, which he thinks, well, that's what the video is going to get, because it's for his vision.
Yeah.
But we're in drawing that back to menial tasks. I've gone through. Have you guys ever used like Adobe Bridge?
I've got it, but no, I haven't.
So I think it can be used for a lot of things, and I think it's called an asset management software. And so if you have a bunch of, digital assets, in our case, it's videos and photos, you can tag all those videos and photos with different words like happy kids or workshop or 3D printing. And then you can find all the videos and photos that have those things in them. So that's been one of the ways that I've been finding the B-roll, but hasn't been consistently done. The things that you think may be good aren't always good. So if I've taken I spent hours, just trying to find things and looking through B-roll on my slow computer, and all the time that I've spent just kind of like trudging through all of this or trudging through all of it, now it's got me to a place where like I know what we have, and this menial work has really paid off, because like I can wrap my head around like where we're at. And it was very similar to one of the first tasks I had when I went there, which was like, just like you said, big bin of screws that says to sort. And so I started sorting the screws and organizing things, and now I know where all those things are.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that's sort of important, just to get a sense of a place. And it's one of the things I love about making stuff and making videos about those things, is that it has such a nice balance of like critical thinking and menial tasks. And I think I was talking to my buddy who's a painter, and he was talking about that as well. Like, I was talking on the phone with him, and I was like, "Are you painting right now?" And he was like, "No, but a lot of the times when I'm doing the like long, boring parts of a painting," because he does sort of like abstract work. So there's some parts which is just filling in an area with color. that's the times when he can talk on the phone or listen to podcasts or whatever else. But there's also the times when he needs to, you know, figure out the line work where he needs to just be zeroed in. And I can't imagine being happy in a job where I had to be like on and critical thinking the whole time. I don't know if like maybe all jobs have that aspect of repetitive work in it. I don't know. Have you had experience in like
Yeah, I mean,
having not
if I
that
think back
experience?
to teaching, there was, I mean, you
Just
think about
constantly
task.
on?
I mean, one of the things that I always used to do if I had a new lab or classroom, particularly labs, which often had storage, or if I moved to a new school, one of the first things I would do is kind of go through, being a science teacher, go through the prep room, the storeroom, find out exactly what kit was available, because it would be different to the ones I'd be used to, and so you could sort of taking that time to kind of find out exactly what's there. I mean, teaching is one of those sort of careers where there's a seasonality to it. Yeah, different times of the year, there's different pressures, there's different things happening. There's a routine to it, obviously with timetabled days, but there's certain things. Yeah, you teach some things repeatedly within a year, repeatedly every year. So you might, if depending on your sort of what classes you have and how it's structured. I know some places structure things differently. I think, from my understanding, quite often American schools, please correct me if I'm wrong, will often have a teacher, say a science teacher, will teach a particular grade, year grade, and maybe only do one or two. Whereas perhaps in the UK they might teach every year grade. And
Yeah,
then somebody else will also
accurate.
teach every year grade. So if you're teaching, and there's I saw some research many years ago which was talking about, for example, how Chinese schools were teaching, I think it was actually mathematics it was looking at, but a Chinese teacher will concentrate on one topic. So a group of students, a particular school, a particular year group in a school, will be taught a certain thing by just one teacher. And another teacher will teach them maybe something else. So that the teacher, over the course of maybe teaching it, maybe there's 10 classes in a year group, they will teach that one thing 10 times. And by the time they've taught that 3 times, they've ironed out any issues in the first couple of times they may have taught it. And they will improve on it. And that's that repetition, which might be kind of akin to kind of a menial task. It may not be a menial piece of learning, but it becomes a menial task because you're repeating it. It's that you're building in the muscle memory. Actually, muscle memory is perhaps a poor phrase, is a poor turn of words. It's you're developing those particular neural pathways for that particular problem, and so you're developing that. But then, if you reach a stage, you're kind of the difficulty. Initially doing it, it's difficult, but after then some practice, it becomes much easier, and it becomes something that gets more flow.
Yeah, I'm sure that's, the more I think about it, the more I feel like in every career it must have that aspect. Unless you're, I don't know. I feel like the higher you go in an organization with more and more pressure on you, maybe it's less of that and more like you just have to spend all your day making key decisions, and there's not
But maybe
much...
that over time would become just routine and mundane again.
Yeah,
but I think look at careers versus burnout rate.
true.
I think if you find the jobs where there's high burnout, that's probably where there isn't enough of the menial.
Yeah, nurses.
And there's too much
Makes
pressure
sense.
being put on. That decision-making process, all that kind of that huge analysis of data. I think, nurses is probably a good one. Paramedics is probably another. You're constantly having to be on. Firemen. You've got that kind of constant need to be on. Soldiers. Particularly if you're actually in a conflict situation. You're constantly having to be on. If you're spending your time, if you're, there's no conflict and you're just in a barracks and you spend half your time just polishing boots and painting grass green and rocks white, then that's probably too menial.
Yeah.
But then if you're, and obviously the balance should be achieved through kind of suitable training activities to create good levels of stress that develop those sort of thinking skills. But
I'm guessing just around about now we've sort of gone through several of the professions, and we've kind of skirted round the fire service through the soldiers. I'm guessing at this point this is where Johnny Allen is waiting for me to throw a dig in at him when he's not actually fighting the fires, and when he's sat polishing knife handles and things like that. But I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to make that dig at him.
it's a very worthwhile job that potentially is very difficult when there's lots of fires.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But it's always fun to take the piss. But I think you're right. I think the that ability to have that that processing time yourself in those kind of situations, in those careers and those jobs where you are making lots of very quick, very impactful decisions. I think you do also need some processing time between those as well.
Yeah, it relates a lot as well to like the lives of artists who spend a lot of their time not making art. Like I think that's kind of the definition of being on. So I mean, we talked about like if you're an abstract artist, maybe you do large installation work. Of course, there's going to be times when you're doing menial tasks. But if you're a writer, like you can't turn off your brain and write. At least I assume you can. And in the low level of writing that I've done, I couldn't. You're thinking consistently about that. And like Dickens walked 20 miles a day in London or something to that scale. And so many writers and artists just spend a lot of their time like reading other people's art or going on walks or exercising or all these other things. And I feel like in a lot of those careers where you're on like that, then you see people like ideally, if they're not burning out, striking a bit more of a work-life balance. And it's something that I've had to become more secure in, because like I like the feeling of being productive. And so if I stop when I feel like I should be going, I can feel bad about it. But you can't just spin your wheels. People need to rest. And it's allowed me to be a little
using that phrase, because that a couple of years ago I stopped using the phrase work-life balance, because part of life is work. So I've started using the phrase work-rest balance, because even if you're not doing your kind of 9 to 5 40 hours a week work, you're still working. You're working, washing the dishes, checking your tire pressures, all these things that are still part of work but not part of actual rest. And I think that's where you do have that kind of switch from maybe decision making in your day job or menial tasks in your day job to decision making for home work stuff, housework, maintenance, things like that. That is kind of part of it is part of your daily life in the same way that sleeping and eating is, but it's still another form of work. So that kind of shift to work rest has kind of given me that reframing enough to try and not be guilty when I need to take rest, to try and actively not work, rather than needing to rest or finding that when you've had all those signs to say take a break, and you've ignored all of them, and then you get sick because you haven't done that, or things like that. To kind of go, no, I think I will take a rest and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah,
that's what kind of the reframing in my head.
Yeah, balance is so important. Essentially, I think it's one of the key things in life. You've mentioned a few times, and we've talked about art in various different ways. I mean, you're a trained engineer. Yeah, that's your sort of qualification, your your background is in engineering. Do you think of yourself still as an engineer, or are you starting to think of yourself more as an artist or creator, just maker? What have you?
So it's an interesting question, because I started going to therapy a couple months ago, which has been great. I would recommend it to anyone who's considering it. And we were talking about grief, and how you can grieve things that aren't people or aren't deaths. Like we grieve lots of things throughout our lives. And there are stages of grief. You know, there's the classic like bargaining, acceptance, the whole shebang, which is debated as to how accurate that is. But that process exists across many things. And I think I mentioned in a session that I was feeling that certain parts of my life felt like something had died. Like I had moved to this new place. I have this new life. I studied something which I'm not pursuing. And it feels like all these things are like, sort of behind me in a way. And we kind of, talked about how this is a form of grief, and a really, important part of grief is processing it. And one of the stages of grief is bargaining. And I think for a little while, I've been sort of bargaining with how I identify myself in terms of like having studied engineering and maybe expected one lifestyle, but now, finding myself in a different one. And then as all this was happening, I went out to a bar with Eden. And just to rewind a second from that story, when you study engineering in Canada, you get an iron ring that you wear on the pinky finger of your dominant hand. And it's supposed to symbolize the responsibility of engineers. And so it bangs on drawing. I'm wearing mine right now. It bangs on drawings as you write. There's this very culty ceremony that goes along with it, which isn't really that culty, but it's cool. It's nice. It's nice, like, fraternity. So we went out to a bar, and this was a bar that the last time we had gone to, I was working at the engineering job where I was very unhappy. And when we were at that bar and I was working at that job 2 years ago, I felt so out of place. I felt like I'd gone after work and I felt like I'm becoming a yuppie. Like I'm becoming this young urban professional, boring. I don't want to be this person right now. Like I want to be experiencing this vibrancy of the city and to be in the thick of it, not commuting an hour every day away from the city to work in this place where I have no connection to the work with people who I don't want to be. Like I don't want to be I don't want to have my boss's job in 5 years or in 10 years. So all that to say, we went to this bar again a week ago, and we got home and I realized that I didn't have my iron ring anymore. Like I had lost it at some point in the night. And up to that point, it's people like graduating engineering students lose their iron rings all the time. It's almost a joke, but I had held on to mine and I always fidget with it. I've dropped it. I've had some close calls, but that night, I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or whatever, but I got home and I no longer had it. And I was like, this is very interesting, because I feel like I felt attached to it, but I feel okay with like not having it right now. Like it's cool. I like it. And I definitely identify with being an engineer, but if I were to lose it, which I thought I had in that point, I wouldn't feel a very hard push to order another one. So, I think over the last 2 years since leaving that job, there's been moments where I've like considered reapplying to engineering. I have reapplied to some jobs. I had some interviews. I came close to working and then ended up not getting those jobs. But I think, right now I feel comfortable having had an engineering education and happy with all of the things that taught me, but I'm not doing engineering right now. I'm using a lot of lessons with engineering. But I love building and creating and making videos. I would love to turn that into a sustainable income. I also just love trying to build something and work for myself. So maybe eventually that won't take the form of being a YouTuber. Maybe it will take another form, which I would be happy with. But I don't know. I'm in this process of doing my 20s thing and figuring it out. But I think one term you asked specifically about was artist. And I found it interesting. I've had more thoughts on this since I've spoken about it on Clamp, but I find it interesting when like people are uncomfortable to call themselves artists who other people might call them artists. And I think it's twofold. It's probably morefold, but I think there's at least two reasons. One is people put artists on a pedestal, and you know, you have to be making great art that means something to be an artist. And the other is that there's a stigma against being an artist. There's an association with not providing for your family, not making a lot of money, being a starving artist, being unreliable, all those negative things, which is weird because they're kind of opposite. But you know, I definitely feel like I like creating things that I think is beautiful. I would call some of the things I make art. I wouldn't call everything that I do art. I don't think everything that an artist do is art, but I don't see a strong reason to be uncomfortable with that label. Now, if I was to talk to an artist who graduated from art school, maybe they would not want me to say that. But with all the qualified artists who I've talked to, it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of ego wrapped up in that title. You know, I think for the most,
it's an interesting bit of phrasing that you use there, though, because I as an engineer and a background and qualification in engineering, if it's a protected term, you can't,
right?
You know, so you can't call yourself an engineer without the qualification to back it up, and same with architects. But you can generally very easily call yourself an artist if you make art.
Yeah,
and sometimes you get called an artist even if you don't think you make art. You know,
yeah, it's this weird like
can call you.
It's this weird clout-ridden title, right? Like it's sociologically based, not lawfully based. It just depends on how much other people maybe decide that your work is valuable or not, or makes them feel something. I mean, I've seen some bad art, but those people are still artists. I don't know.
Well, I mean, what even is bad art for a subjective thing? You know,
yeah,
bad engineering,
you're totally right.
It falls over, it falls down, it collapses. You know, it breaks, it kills someone. But art doesn't generally do that. It might make someone pull a funny face, or you know, something like that. But
that's something I struggled with quite a bit. Still, even for me, I mean, as again, science teacher. Everything, marking work for students, marking exams, it's very, very objective. Yeah, it's right or wrong. So many other subjects, some of which as a student I was very good at, but they're very subjective. And yeah, if you write a story and it's for an English language course, you might find that story amazing. Somebody else reading it might find it amazing and think, oh, that's a great story. And yes, there are some things that are very objective. You know, the use of punctuation, grammar, structures. You know, there's an objectivity to those. But the essence of a story may well be quite subjective. And the example I've quoted before, I think I've quoted it here before. Ian Banks, who's a British author. There's two Ian Banks. I think one is Ian S. Banks and the other one is Ian Banks. I can't remember which one it is.
Ian M.
Is it
Banks,
M? Is it? Yeah. Well, one of these Ian Bankses, one of his books was a required text on an A level, which is kind of the exams at age 18. English literature course or English language, I don't know which one it was. And it just so happened that one particular year, Ian Banks's son was doing the English course and was studying his dad's book. So he had to write a particular essay, and so his dad gave him some help on that. Didn't write it for him, but he kind of said, yeah, this is what I was thinking about with this character, that sort of thing. And so he wrote it. It was essentially the perfect inside knowledge as to, as we often have to do in kind of literature kind of courses. What was Shakespeare thinking? Why did he say this particular thing? What did that mean? And things like that. And so he wrote it, and the kid got not a very good grade. he'd written this with the
I mean,
absolute
how would you quote that? Would you
inside
just,
story.
quote your source, Dad?
Dad, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if in literature you need to. Again, it's not science. It's not like well, I guess at a certain level, I don't know. Citations are they needed at kind of A-level English? But his teacher disagreed with. He got the poor grade because the teacher disagreed that this was what Ian Banks was thinking with the particular characters or whatever the particular aspect of it was. So the subjective reading of the teacher downgraded what you could say is quite objective analysis given by the son of the author.
But not everyone's privy to that objectivity.
No, they're not. But in that particular case, they were. But it shows that actually sometimes subjectivity is, I think, problematic. Because another teacher, somebody else in the country, may have gone, oh, really like that. I think I agree with that. And he gets a higher grade.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what would happen, though, isn't it? Is you would get a group of students who would generally be marked one way on, compared to another.
Do you not think that
you would?
Do you not think though the teacher was expecting the student to synthesize their own opinions, and they just didn't do the assignment because they interviewed their father? Maybe.
I mean, I obviously it wasn't someone I was kind of privy to in terms of sort of school. It's an anecdotal thing, but yeah, maybe.
Well be, yeah. Maybe they did cite their dad on the paper, and that was enough to be marked down for it. Yeah, it's got to be your subjective opinion.
It's a little cheeky too. It's like fact. Every other kid in your class has to think their own thoughts, but you can just ask the author.
Yeah, maybe that's why the teacher marked them down. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, I'll take that.
Or the fact that I've had to read this book over and over and over again to hundreds of children over the year. I'm marking you down because you're his son.
Reverse nepotism.
This book. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. But I can remember sitting in kind of class and somebody going, oh, this was a reflection of the mood of the author at the particular time because of whatever. It's like, well, maybe it's just because it rhymed.
Yeah. I think there's certain works too which are like lauded and held up that just don't resonate with everyone. And I don't think just because something has a deeper meaning, like if you can't understand it, if it doesn't come to you, maybe like you don't have to like it. It doesn't have to be the thing for you. I felt that with 1Q84 by Murakami, which is like, Murakami fans love this book. It's his magnum opus. It's like 1,000 pages long. And it was really interesting, and I liked it stylistically, but like just felt like there was a lot of like unanswered questions, and you could read really far into all the symbolism, but I was like, my grandma was an author, and she had this great saying, which is that there are too many great books in the world to waste your time reading books that you don't enjoy. Which I think is very important to think about if you're reading a book that's 1,000 pages long. Like it better be a good book to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
I totally agree on that. I actually did, when I was in school, I ended up doing 2 lots of English from age 14 to 16. I did 2 English classes rather than everyone else did 1. I had knee issues. I kept falling over, so I couldn't do games. So I can't remember what the choices were given, but essentially I was given the choice to do additional English instead. So I ended up studying, instead of studying 1 Shakespeare, I studied 2 Shakespeares. In fact, actually, I think I may have done 4. I think it might have been 2 and 4 rather than. So I did double the amount of courses. I read extra plays and all sorts. And when my eldest, because we homeschooled, did English literature at GCSE. And so when we were kind of sort of selecting the books, I started reading some of the books because we weren't. A lot of schools will go, right, we're going to do Macbeth, and we're going to do an Inspector Calls, and we're going to do something else, because that's what we always do. But we had the option, because you get the exam board supply a list of books and plays, and you have to do one from this column, one from this column, and one from each of two others. So we were kind of like, okay, we'll get as many of them as we can from the library. We'll have a look through them, we'll read them, and select which one's most interesting or want to do. And I started reading several of them and just like, this is dire. It's not enjoyable. I can understand that maybe somebody who's very much into literature might see this as a great book to try and analyse. But in terms of maybe encouraging young people to read and to read a variety of
there's no car chases,
styles.
barely any explosions. There's no lasers. There's no guns.
Yeah. But yeah, why not give those books? Yeah, why not stick Harry Potter in as a
That's a good
book
point.
to study at things? Yeah. Get them reading something interesting.
Yeah, why is it that all the best books that I read growing up were not part of the school curriculum? I mean, I think there's some boring reasons for that. One of which is like it's expensive to buy these books, and schools have had them for a while. But in this ideal future where everyone, I don't know, maybe all the kids have a Kindle, or maybe they just all get an ebook, or it's not expensive for some reason. Yeah, get kids excited about reading.
There's the other aspect of it, isn't there? That kind of like a dad joke or a Christmas cracker joke. They're supposed to be bad because you're not alienating anyone by having something that is really enjoyed by one person or a small group. So if you were to pick something like Harry Potter for school curriculum, you might get some people who are, quite polarized with it. Some people might really love it and be
it's
way in
selecting
excess
a
of the
text.
subject.
Who doesn't like Harry Potter though?
Well, this is the thing.
Fundamental Christians, for one.
It's true.
But I can think of some other books that just everyone doesn't like.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think that's where you might get something that is universally disliked by everyone, and then it's kind of evens the playing field, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I fell asleep reading Romeo and Juliet in high school English. Like it was my turn to read, I was falling asleep. Like that's not a good sign.
It's not.
I understand it's a great work and it's very influential and everything. It's just kind of boring to a 16-year-old.
We had we had the discovery when we did Romeo and Juliet. Oh no, it was Midsummer. I was just going to say it's not Romeo and Juliet. Midsummer Night's Dream was one of the books I studied. We discovered is it Spoonerisms, where you swap the first letters of these, where our English teacher was discussing a certain fairy called Puck and got that wrong. That went down in school legend. But Romeo and Juliet, there was a movie made. I can't remember it's a long time ago, very long time ago. There was a movie made in either the 70s or 80s about Romeo and Juliet, which was used in. Our teacher used it as part of the kind of just to get to know the story. And there was this sort of one scene where all you see is sort of Juliet's bare breast heading towards the camera.
I watched that.
Large.
Because I remember that scene.
Yeah, it's just this kind of breast and nipple fill the entire screen. It was just like,
that's one way to get 16-year-old lads at least into.
Actually, as it happened, there was quite a lot more attention paid in case there was a kind of a repeat of that scene.
Yeah, we got Romeo plus Juliet, the Leonardo DiCaprio thing, which in fairness, I did enjoy. It was a nice kind of weird update with stuff like the guns and things, to kind of almost modernize the story but keep the original, phrasing of everything.
I've seen a few good plays, Shakespearean plays acted out, where they've kind of added modernized twists to it. And some of those have been very good. Rather than trying to sort of set it in period, they've added things, and I think that things like that can make things more accessible. But writing any curriculum is difficult because you've got a class of 30 students. What appeals to 5 of them might not appeal to 10 others,
and you're underpaid.
Something else is going to appeal to only 3 of them, but somebody else who's designed the curriculum's decided that it's going to be, like say, the book that everyone universally hates.
I think sometimes that's the better approach. As Morley says, if you're not being paid to be nice, then you may as well just be an arse to everyone. Make everyone suffer.
I mean, if you're teaching high school English, I mean, and you're going over Greek authors, you should watch "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," the Coen brothers movie, because that's just the Odyssey set in modern times.
Mm-hmm.
I think quite a few films are. We talked last week about the kind of kind of what's called now. John Harvey will jump in hopefully and tell us the kind of there's that limited number of stories.
Yeah.
The Iliad?
There's a phrase for it. Yeah, there's essentially there's like 7 plot vehicles that can be used. Any film you can pretty much attach it to one of those sort of 7s. Yeah, it's like hero's journey, and if you look at like a lot of films, the hero comes in, something bad happens, hero gets kind of trounced a little bit, or there's a difficult situation, and then hero comes back, saves the day in the end.
Interestingly, there's been a psychological study with why certain people will seek out new things all the time, and why some people will go back to they'll rewatch that film that they've seen 15-20 times, or they'll go back and watch that TV series that they've seen over and over, and there's that comfort in predictability. It's that sort of going full circle almost, but that routine of something that's it's not a decision making thing. It's just that repetition of something that has become routine. It's predictable and it's comforting. It's that moment to have a mental break, to to fidget with something in your head almost, by not having to actively think about something new. And that's something that I tend to fall back on quite a lot, is rewatching things that are then predictable. I don't have to sit and focus on. I can have that predictable story and know what the outcome's going to be. I'm not sat there waiting for the twist or working out where the plot's going to go. It's you switch it on and go, oh, right, okay, so this is going to be hero does this is probably going to happen at some point. This will happen. It's just wait for the music to change, and then it's going to be there.
Yeah. It's funny. I think some people, when they're like watching movies or shows, are very conscious of those like plot elements which are happening. Like my girlfriend Eden, she's one of those people. But I go full like suspension of disbelief, and I'm just like in it. I'm like, all right, what's this character doing? Like, that person lied to them. Like, screw that guy. And she's like, no. Like, that's foreshadowing. This is gonna happen later. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right.
See, I can't watch particularly films and TV. I can't watch it a second time. And a lot of books I can't. I've mentioned before that there's only literally a handful of books that I can read again and again and again. Hitchhikers, any of the Hitchhikers, or Douglas Adams, Touching the Void by Joe Simpson, which is kind of not so much it's not a fiction, it's a real life. I can't think even something like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I can read them again, but there needs to be at least 10 years between reading them. So I've forgotten chunks.
Enough time to forget, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why Douglas Adams is a perfect example of something you can dip back into, because of that, the sheer quantity of stuff that you'll forget very easily.
Yeah.
It's like the comedian Tim Vine. You if you watch one of his stand-up shows, he does a lot of one-liners and puns and things. So you can quite often get to the end of watching like one of his kind of shows, an hour-long show that's just a relentless barrage of one-liner jokes. And by the end of it, you're lucky if you remember 5 or 6. Your sides are absolutely aching from giggling so much, but you can't remember anything you've heard. So you can go back, a day or two later, watch it again, and it's all new again.
Yeah, I used to reread books a lot as a kid, like certain fantasy books, Harry Potter, and I don't know if I ever read Lord of the Rings, but I did read The Hobbit. Certain books that I really liked, I definitely read multiple times, but I haven't really done it since being a kid. But I have gone into that with music, and I felt guilty about it before, where I'm like, I'm listening to this song too much. I'm like gonna milk all the enjoyment out of it. But then I'm reading a book right now, which I'll talk about later, and they talk about in the time when people listen to music with records, which I've never experienced. Listening to the same records over and over and over. I'm like, if they were doing it then, I don't need to feel bad about it.
The big circular ones, not the little circular ones.
Yeah. But I get super into music for certain like scenes in my life. I think that's one of the reasons I've always wanted to make videos, is because I everyone does this. Everyone sees parts of their life as like part of a movie. I'm like, I'm walking to the gym, I want to listen to this song. I'm driving out of the city, I want to listen to that song. And that's one of the reasons I love the accessibility of like streaming platforms, or whatever, however you listen to your music in your pocket, because you can call up that perfect song instantly.
Yeah, absolutely,
and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Is not having to, for some people it's that ritual of, I'm going to listen to this whole album. I'm going to go and get that album in whatever format you've got it, and sit there and listen to the whole thing straight the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I'm the, chuck several hundred MP3s onto an SD card, hit random, that'll do me.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy with that kind of jumping around. But then there are certain times, certain work modes where I'm like, no, I need to listen to this now. And that's where those streaming platforms are so useful. That predictability that you need is that kind of like, shift away from everything else. It's that you said, that ritual of driving into the city or out of the city. You can get it's that mental reset almost.
Yeah. Oh, mental reset's a great word. Like, I love biking around the city. I get a lot of like good ideas and just become like hyper positive, almost like manic when I'm biking around. It feels like amazing. And I love doing it while listening to music and a lot of like hardcore stuff. And everything feels a lot easier. The ideas become a lot more free flowing. I'm like, I'm going to do this. Those are the moments when I'm like, I want to make, a video every day, because this feels like a movie and there's so much vibrancy going on all around me. And that's when, like, for a period I was doing like bike food delivery. And that's one of the reasons I really liked doing it, is because I got to like, have all this nice introspective, active time. But then at a certain point, it takes too much time, and it's like, that's nice. But then I also need the time where I can just like sit down and work and do active work. Because you can't get everything done just daydreaming.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
If only, yeah. Imagine if we could think things into... Crikey, if I could think things into place, I'd be the most productive maker in the planet.
Yeah. I think that's been a good growing experience for me recently, is like taking the time to like write ideas down when I have them, sketch things out rather than keeping it in my head, and viewing that more as like a constructive experience versus just a tracking experience. Like, I'm not just recording the idea, but the idea is becoming more refined as I'm writing it down and working through it. Like, I think for a while I sort of neglected or looked down upon like infrastructural tasks, just like tracking things and filing, not literally filing, but those sorts of things, where it was like, that's not the real work. That's just all this boring stuff that I don't want to do. But in becoming a little bit more mature, I'm like, no, like that work, has its place in the same way that the beautiful daydreaming, big ideas coming to me work has its place.
And as you told earlier, if it's done right, you get that whole idea of, like you say, talking about knowing where all the nuts and bolts are at the Steam project, knowing what you've got. If you do those little infrastructure tasks well and do them in a manner it will support the dreams and the ideas and the creativity, and make those things accessible. It just, even things like cleaning your workshop at the end of a build session and having it ready to go the next time. So when you've got that idea that, oh, I want to I want to go and make this thing now, you can go in and you can actually make that happen rather than going, I've got to clear all this crap away and get the bench accessible and get all the stuff off the floor and where's the saw or where's the bits and bobs. Without having that infrastructure there, then that creativity, then that flow state just disappears.
Yeah. I treat my garage where I like do any like dusty cutting or anything as like a dumpster. And like when I'm like done with a scrap piece of wood, I just like throw it to the side and forget about it. And that place needs a good overhaul because it's helpful just to have a place to do things outside, but it's not a conducive work environment. And it's getting worse. Overdue for some good spring cleaning.
That's basically been my past couple of weeks is going through and doing exactly that. So I've been the same, you get partway through a project and you think, oh, that'll be useful for X, Y, and Z future thing, and just kind of hoarding it for later. But yeah, having that kind of like, again, it's another mental reset, isn't it? It's that kind of like, right, these projects are done. Let's have that complete kind of go through top to toe and chuck out anything that needs chucking out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying anything because I feel personally attacked by
as you should.
But it's good too. Like I wish I had the space where I could hoard stuff and use it later on in products. Like I would love to have Laura Kampf set up where she can pull the perfect vintage machinery from a shelf and use that in a project.
Yeah.
I bought this time clock. I don't know if that's the right term for them, but like you clock in and out with those machines.
Oh yeah.
Time clock.
A worker time clock, because I saw an exhibit at an art museum here where an artist had used one every day she does her art. And I thought it was really cool. Like it's a interesting, just visual way to see how much time you spend on something. And it's, it's not typically used for people who are independently employed. It's like flipping that whole concept on its head. And so, it's just
that's a Van Neistat type of approach
yeah,
to things, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I love this idea, and the gizmosity of it just made me happy. So I was like, I'm gonna get one. So I found one online and I bought it, and having not very much space, it's easy to feel like the pressure of like trying to get that up and running. But for now, it's kind of like it's sitting on the bottom shelf, and I'm like, when it's time, I'll get to that. That'll be a cool project, but there's no rush. But it's hard to even just accept that because having so little space.
Yeah, it's very easy to get completely cluttered and overloaded with sort of stuff. And I mean,
one thing when you mentioned before about the flip up workbench is this here that you can see behind me is a flip up workbench.
Oh yeah. For about 10 minutes.
Well, when I was on a hangout with a group of makers when I was installing this, so we were all chatting away and they were watching me actually installing this and asking what the hell it was. So I sort of fitted it and showed lifts up and down and can do this and can do that. And Sharon from Figments Made, it gives you an idea of how long ago this was. Sharon said, Jamie, that is going to stay up forever. And
up,
it has
not down.
It has stayed up as a workbench.
Yeah.
In my way since I installed it. And
I
have walked around it every day since then. And she was absolutely right. That has not folded away once.
There's a good chance I'll eat my words and have wished I just got a permanent table. But I feel like I have so little space in here that like I'll feel the strong pressure to clear it off. The reason the main reason I want to do it is just because like I don't have a clear work surface in here. So the idea behind this would just be like a work table where I could actually like make a thing. So I can make this backpack and like lay out the parts and I don't have to work on the floor. So I'm going to cover like, because right behind me, and obviously this camera angle is horrible and eventually I'll get a better one set up, but ideally in the podcast, the bottom of it will be covered with stickers, and those will all be displayed when it is in its up position. So if I never put it up, I'll never be able to show off all the other maker stickers, and I'll feel guilty as well. So I'm just building this nice little guilt trap for myself.
That's a good plan.
Yeah, we'll see if it pans out.
I think that idea. I mean, I noticed down when you were talking earlier, you were sort of talking about making your space visually interesting, and that's something I've been my own space, both here and in the Tinkerage, the past probably couple of months. I've been thinking about, and probably on and off for longer, but certainly within the sort of the last month to 6 weeks, it's something that I've been trying to give more thought to, and trying to sort of move things. Partly when I installed the third monitor, there was just behind there's a picture frame which contains a little Lego figurine that was given to me when I left my last but one school, and it's kind of it's supposed to represent me, and it's got a nice little thing, and there's people signed the back and things like that. And it had been tucked away. It had become hidden, and I've kind of brought it out, and I'm slowly trying to sort of work on how I can get some of the things that people have made for me, things that I also find interesting. Like, not necessarily, but like the 10 bullets. I quite like having like something like 10 bullets up, something that you can look at, like your Think Bigger, on a daily basis, so you can actually kind of think about it. So it's something you can look at for inspiration at any one particular time. It's also something that is maybe in your field of view, and so feeding into your subconscious by kind of osmosis. And I like things like that. Now I've got a limited amount of space, but I've very much been trying to think recently about how I can make my space less cluttered, but in doing that, make it more interesting. Interesting isn't the word I kind of
like inspiring
attached to it, or inspiring, but having those things that I find inspiring, or having those books that I find motivating. I mean, most of the books up on that shelf behind me, I've got things in front of them. If I want to sort of pull a book off the shelf, I've got to pull a pile of stuff off in front of it. And maybe that's partly my own fault for making shelves that were well over a foot deep, because it's about, actually I think they're about a foot deep. Oh, don't turn around. They're about a foot deep, so it's easy. There is space to put things on. About a library bookshelf, you don't have that space. But then I also like having the space where I can put something, but I've just put too much stuff. And I think it's going to take active. Yeah, it's going to take active thought on my part, and probably some quite hard thinking to kind of go, right, well, that's got to go. Or maybe I need to put those things into almost like a memory box or a chest, or those things need to be cleared.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having catalogues. I don't know about you. I haven't got one. I'd love to have a McMaster car catalogue, because it's just I used to love it as a kid. For me it was Mapling catalogues, and there was a company called RS catalogues. Crikey, yeah. When one of my physics teachers let me have some old RS catalogues when they had some new ones come in, that was just like, it was just...
I don't know if you're familiar with RS, Morley.
I'm not. No.
They're sort of a cross between
a bit like Radio Spares.
Yeah, like Radio Shack.
Car.
Yeah. So you used to get the they're an industrial supply company that specialise in electronic stuff. But they do just about everything. You can buy, Unistrut or Trunkin or things like that. So like industrial type stuff, or gears and motors, and stuff that you would get on McMaster. But down to if you search on their website, there's for LEDs, and you might get 1,500 results. So like every possible variation on LED, and hugely in depth. But when you ordered their catalog from them, it would come in 5 individual catalogs volumes for the different product
Oh
types,
wow.
and it was big catalog size, like A4 type size book, and probably a good five big solid chunky catalogs.
Yeah, and
in a big binder,
inch and a half thick each one.
Yeah, easily, yeah.
Wow.
So you'd get this big, just sort of like encyclopedia type delivery when these catalogs arrived. In a box. It was an event when they arrived.
Wow. It makes me think, like, I have I have a bunch of books that are very inspirational, and that's kind of why I bought them. But they're like buried at the very bottom of our bookshelf, like behind a bunch of other things. And I'm like, why don't I have those accessible so I can look at them if I'm like just like sitting and trying to think about what to do next? Like pretty soon I'll have this table like completely cleared off, and I think that would be a very nice thing to have next to my computer. Yeah. It's so I love the process though of like trying to optimize this space. I loved it as a kid too. Like I would reorganize my room all the time. Like once a season, I feel like I would move my bed to another part of the room, and just trying to figure out how everything best works together. It's so fun.
Looping back to 3D printing and stuff, that's where it's so much more enjoyable, I find now, because you can do those things like your recent thing of needing to hang your vernier calipers up.
Yeah,
things like that where you'd have previously had to chuck things in a box. Well, actually, no, I can put this in a more accessible space, and it then becomes even more fun, I think, to organize the space.
Definitely. It's just a different type of fun. It's not the like, look at this amazing thing and all the layer lines. It's like I can actually improve my life.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is more mature fun.
It's the functional prints, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an important thing. Right. Where obviously we've got a change of time zones, and we're going to aim for no more than sort of 2 hours this evening. So should we move on to kind of things that have been sort of grabbing our attention, whether that's projects, books, films, YouTube, things in the past, or things we're working towards? Doesn't really matter. So as usual, guest goes first. So Morley, what's been grabbing your attention lately?
All right. I liked how you framed this, because I feel like it allowed me to go in a lot of different directions, which I tend to go with.
That's why we did this one.
We do. I mean, it's part of the Waffle way. Yeah, just it allows us tangents, and I think we don't generally limit by anything. Yeah, we've
limitless.
We've covered so many topics. We've covered so many hours, often in the same podcast. So it's just like, why limit anywhere else? So
there you go.
It's like,
yeah. So what has been grabbing my attention recently? I think it's interesting to think about the things that you start to notice across other parts of your life, and that seem to keep popping up, because it's not like those things are any more present, really. It's more just so that probably you're find them important or interesting, and so you're subconsciously choosing to notice those things everywhere. I think there's a name for that psychological phenomenon.
I was just trying to remember what that was as well.
Yeah, like the recency effect. It's something like that.
Isn't it? I'm thinking it's something like Meinhof. I was going to say
that sounds
Meinhof,
right.
Like when you buy a car effect, and then you suddenly see loads of the same car. Right?
Yeah. So, I guess I'll lead in with the things that have led to this, and then end with the thing itself. So, we were watching Inventing Anna recently, which is fantastic. The docuseries on Netflix about the fake German heiress who basically conned her way into New York's elite. So that was great. And then I've also felt this like pull to try to connect more with the creative community that's local to me in Toronto, because I really love doing the few collaborations that I've done, and I want to make that like a big part of what I do, and I want to try to connect with these people. And so I started a Discord in Toronto. I have a friend who studies fashion design, so a lot of her fashion design friends have come into the Discord, which has been really cool. And then I've also become obsessed with this thing called voguing, which is a pretty big part of drag balls. Basically, it's this very specific dance style where basically the dance is influenced by the poses of fashion models in Vogue magazine. And it's to this like very heavy house music. There's this whole aspect of it called falls, where the performers will like take these super intense falls. And it's like one of the most amazing high energy things I've ever seen. Like I really like moshing at concerts and those sort of like borderline chaotic creative expression experiences. And so I was watching this, I was like, this is cool. And this is something I want to go to. And so those three things, and I think there was one more thing that linked them. So the book I alluded to earlier that I've been reading is called Just Kids by Patti Smith. So Patti Smith, for those who don't know, she's a poet and a musician and an artist. She seems to have had a very interesting, varied life. I don't know a lot about her art outside of this book, but she lived for a period with Robert Mapplethorpe, who was another famous artist who largely did photography. Although it took him a while to get to there. He was doing a lot of other things before he was doing photography. And they talk a lot in this book about the clothes and like Robert's obsession with clothes and dressing himself and all these other things. So long-winded way of saying that there are all these things I'm interested in and looking at right now that have to do with fashion. And fashion is never something I've really been interested in. Like I was probably, of my friends in high school, the one who was the least interested in clothing or dressing well. But I feel like recently I've seen it as this like really amazing way of like self-expression and this very like beautiful, it has that novelty aspect that we were talking about earlier. Like really beautifully constructed clothes and the colors and the way that you can express yourself through that. So I don't know how to like synthesize that or if I'm going to bring it into my work at all, but I think it's kind of undeniable that it is the thing that's been like grabbing my attention recently. And I've thought about it more and like wanting to do more sewing projects, but I just find it very interesting. It's also just having come from a background where I've only really built things from rigid materials or like for flexible, very limited, simple leather things compared to clothes. Trying to make a 3D object out of fabric, which I'm trying to do right now with this backpack, is so hard. It's a whole different language.
Different way of thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, fashion has been grabbing my attention recently. I find it so interesting, especially in a world where like it's a lot of us buy cheap clothes that was likely produced by like slave labor or very poorly treated labor. So just like thinking about it a little more as an important part of my life. It's cool. I'm thinking about it. Cool. Sorry, we looked like you were about to say something.
I was just trying to let Andy know that he's muted, that whatever he's
Oh, okay.
Dropped you, yeah. So you just said it, yeah. So my youngest was moving around upstairs, so I kind of muted it. There's that whole thing sort of fast fashion.
Yeah,
and I think there's that. The word fashion to me often brings that element of fast fashion. Yeah, the kind of wear once, buy cheap, wear once, throw it away.
Seasonal change
sort of things that you get, and as opposed to sort of almost like style, and then high fashion. I think that it's something over the years. It's something I've again, when I was in school, I certainly was not I was certainly not cool. I was certainly not described as fashionable in any way.
I don't think
I've
seen
ever
that
been.
album cover you made.
Well, I think technically you made the album cover, yeah. I was just posing, but I think there's an element of sort of style that I've always been fascinated by, and I think it's interesting to see how things, fashion, high street fashion, high end fashion, the kind of crazy Paris fashion week type fashion versus perhaps classic style that some people might have. I find that quite an interesting idea, and a few times I've kind of thought that actually quite an interesting career to have, being working in sort of fashion and style.
It seems
I don't
fascinating.
think I have the artistic skills. I certainly not when I was younger had the artistic skills to consider doing it, but I find it interesting. But I just want to sort of talk about that bag for a second. Are you designing the bag from scratch yourself, or are you?
So I'm
going for
the sort of like general process I'm taking is like, I know like the type of bag I want to make. So I'm sort of basing it off of this very high end backpack made by Chrome Industries, who makes like very high quality, mostly bags for messenger, like bike messengers. So I'm kind of like picking and choosing features from that. But yeah, I'm not using a pattern as of yet. I'm sort of like deciding how I want to make it and just going from there. I'm also like deciding on reasons to put it off because it's very intimidating. Like, again, like one of the reasons I want to build this fold down work table is like, well, I need that before I can build the bag, which I think is a valid, self-imposed procrastination.
Yeah.
But
absolutely,
it's a little scary for sure.
I think having known people who've made their own equipment for like backpacking, I think, and also, I mean, actually, it's called back to kind of sort of Tom Sachs, because I don't know if you about some of the fashion items that he has designed and manufactured for sale. So like the fanny pack. I mean, there's the shoes, and a lot of people know about the shoes. But there's also sort of other items that he made that's kind of almost along that kind of sort of NASA line. And one of those has been quite a useful looking kind of what we would call a bum bag in the UK, but I think you guys over there call it a fanny pack, which has a completely different meaning over here. But kind of made out of sort of Dyneema and some other interesting materials with some interesting buckles on, and kind of going alongside that, there are groups of people on Instagram. It's worth checking out the Europa Research Institute and some of the people that are involved in that. And there's actually a Discord with these people. And you get folk who are literally sort of saying, well, I want to make that. I want to make that bag. I can't afford to spend $400, $700, depending on the particular model or how few there are, because there is that cult-like status. So there's a limited number made. They sell for high prices to start with, and then they become even rarer. But who are then sort of attempting to make their own version of it, adapted to their own particular needs as well. So it might be that little bit smaller or that little bit bigger, depending on the size of their person or what they want to carry. And that is, you get that kind of, I'm going to build it. The first one, that's what I go to school on. And the next one is going to be a little bit better. And I found better materials, or I've developed the technique. So I think you may end up making multiple.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy way of thinking about it too, because I think I'm like building this very high end archetype, which I just need to start, and I know it's not going to be as good as I want it to be.
This is where we start throwing in other ideas, like looking at people like Becky Stern and Billy Rubin and Ali from Geeky Faye, those people who are doing
3D printing
things
in fabric?
with 3D printing in fabric, electronics in fabric, mixing in those, sort of multi-material type stuff.
Yeah.
Which then
So
just mixes in a bit of coding, bit of electronics, bit of 3D printing. Some phenomenally cool stuff.
Like Andy, when you mentioned like your associations with fashion and fast fashion, the Paris fashion industry, it's been very interesting talking to my friend who's in a fashion design program and the sorts of things that she's learning and working on. So her thesis project right now is 3D printing on fabric.
Cool.
And it's, they are, she's studying to become a fashion designer, and it's a, relatively liberal university program. So they learn about fast fashion and the fashion industry. But I think for them going through it, they're trying to, they're learning academically and practically how to design fashion. I think kind of focusing on the higher, more experimental, maybe esoteric end. So sort of aligned with those much more interesting projects. But then also, you have to do these certain elements, like writing a screenplay. It has to be a certain format for it to actually sell. I also just live in an area where there's a lot of like young artists who have very distinctive styles and walk around. And I'm like, it's awesome to see, like, very vulnerable, and people, I think there's maybe a little bit of like narcissism maybe wrapped up in it, where it's like everyone is trying to like be very distinctive or different, but it's also just like self-expression. And it's something I haven't thought about a lot before, and it's interesting.
Some people don't. Sometimes you don't think about it as sort of self-expression. It just is. I mean, I've got a photograph somewhere of me on a cave rescue event, a training event, and I'm wearing a pair of. There's a company called Troll who used to make. I don't know if they still do. I don't know if they're still around. They were famous for making sort of climbing harnesses and climbing helmets, but they also, for a time, went into sort of climbing clothing. And I had a pair of Troll Omni trousers, and they were lovely trousers. They're made from a high-tech material. It was windproof, dried really quickly if it was wet. They were designed for climbing, so they weren't particularly baggy, but there was plenty of freedom of movement. So if you were flexible enough to be able to get your foot up next to your head on a climb, you could do that in those trousers without risk of them sort of splitting. Not something you can do in, say, a pair of jeans. But the ones I had were a white base with pink, yellow, and black squares all over them.
Nice.
I mean, at the time it was, but I bought them because I liked them, and they were a good price. They were on sale, probably because nobody else was buying them. But they were,
sounds very 90s.
Comfortable. Yeah, early 90s. Yeah. They were very comfortable, and in some ways it was self-expression. I kind of didn't follow. Everyone else was at that event was either in jeans and probably a North Cape double pile fleece, or a Helly Hansen fleece, or fibre pile. Wasn't even a fleece then. It would have been fibre pile, or they were in some other jogging bottoms and the hoodie of the time. It'd be a sweatshirt rather than a hoodie. But that's kind of those difference between. I didn't think I was self-expressing, but in a sense I was. I didn't think about it. It was just like, I like that, I'm going to wear that. I don't care if people laugh at me. People have been laughing at me for decades at that point, so what was I worrying about?
And it's also about feeling good. Like, if there's many ways to feel good relating to clothing, like it being functional is a huge part of it. Being comfortable, looking good. I think they're all different sides to the same coin. And I think, I don't know, maybe in the past I sort of assumed that fashion was all about how it looked, but there's many other parts that influence it, as you said.
Jamie,
it's a very personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the subject of fashion and really awesome stuff, I mentioned them before, but Ali from Geeky Fi Art, they've done an absolutely amazing project. I don't know if the video's out proper for everyone, but I know it's for patrons. It is
only
out
at the moment.
But it is just phenomenal. It's a necklace, LED necklace, that is linked to like an air quality meter, and it reacts to the quality of the air in the environment, in their local environment. So
cool.
If they walk into somewhere that's got a lot of paint fumes or smoke or things like that, it will change the color of the necklace and create a pattern across to kind of alert. It is just a wonderful, wonderful project. I still, the video is there, queued up, ready for me to watch in a bit. I'm very.
That's awesome.
I may have had a little bit of, kind of seeing the project come together. So
you've helped.
Cool. Quite a bit.
I mean, on the topic of style, I mean, they've got style.
Oh yeah,
Very much so.
yeah they do. In spades.
Very much so.
But the other thing that's
I just call back. Actually, I was just thinking. Second, your friend probably printing on textiles. One of the names we didn't mention in that list that Jamie came up with is Sophie Wong. She's been working on printing on fabrics for a long time. So if your friend's not aware of Sophie, it might be worth pointing her in her direction.
Cool.
Billy's done a few as well. Things
Yes.
like bits of jewellery printed onto fabric, which is very awesome.
Yeah, but I think Sophie's gone kind of whole outfit build.
Yeah.
All right, I got to try this. Jamie, you're the 3D printing expert. Can I do it on my Prusa? Is it possible?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, nice.
Chris Smith from the Woodgeneer did printing onto t-shirts as well.
That's awesome.
Just with a regular bog standard. You can do it with PLA or TPUs and things. And yeah, it is such a cool thing. That is a great way to get you a bit of pizzazz back into your 3D printing game.
Nice.
The other thing that that's caught my attention is Neil Cross from Tech 3D. Quite heavy like CAD channel. Does a lot of stuff with things like Inventor and general CAD hardware stuff. Very, very good resource for anyone in that kind of world of like 3D modeling or CAD stuff or IT. If you're trying to work out what PC to buy for CAD, he's got the videos there. And he's also very much into motorsport. And he did a bit of an experiment last week where he showed two photographs side by side. One is a trackside photograph of a F1 car taken out a race, and next to that is another F1 car, same race. One of those cars is a 3D model that's been textured and rendered by him, and the other one is the actual trackside photo. And it's just unreal. You can't tell the difference.
Wow.
It is phenomenal. But yeah, he does that as a bit of a challenge of like, here's a poll, here's a survey, tell me which one you think is the fake car. Yeah.
That reminded me, like, blurring the borders between reality and the 3D world. I was thinking today about getting a 3D scanner, because just making mini cats sounds like a great time.
Can you get cats to stay still long enough to scan them?
I don't know. How long do they need to be still for? I've never used one.
It depends on the scanner that you get, but
okay.
Anywhere from, you're probably looking at least 30 seconds, I would imagine.
Okay. I could probably do that.
Might be all right with sleeping. You can get Penny to fall asleep right in the middle of the room.
All right.
Or on a table.
Or like a tranquilizer and then pose her.
Also an option, but we're not endorsing it. How about you, Andy? What's been grabbing your attention?
This week, a few things. We had a new cooker arrived Friday. Stove from our American friends.
Thank you.
Which is one of the kind of unfortunate reasons why I won't be going to Maker Central. Got some expenditures. So we had that fitted today. So we had our first meal with that. Quite smelly when you get a cooker brand new and it starts. Yeah, it's got all the kind of. Even if you wiped it out, there's still those oils and greases on the seals and things that kind of burn off.
Stuff, yeah.
When it was cold out, it was like back door open, just to kind of let all the fumes out. So that, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, one of our cars has been very poorly. That came back on Wednesday, so we're back to 2 cars, which makes life a lot easier. So I don't have to ferry wife and eldest round for if I need to use the car. So that makes things a lot easier. But kind of getting my more the creative side of things. As mentioned earlier, I've been reading or starting to read the book called Range by, I'm pretty sure it's David Epstein, which talks about generalism versus specialism. So I started reading that on Wednesday because our other car needed its MOT, its annual sort of inspection. So I kind of had a good hour to read that between worrying whether it was going to pass or not, but sometimes read that before we did pass, thankfully. But then, I think it was on James from Malt Make Stories a couple of days ago. He highlighted a new podcast called UK Makers Podcast. I'd not heard about this before. I already followed one of the hosts on YouTube, but wasn't following them on Instagram. 8 episodes so far, and they seem to be getting close to 2 weeks rather than the regular weeks for the next one. I don't know if they're stopping. I hope not.
As far as I know, their episode 9 is due out soon.
Cool. Sounds good. Sounds like you have some inside knowledge. Maybe that's for one for the afterwards.
After show.
So yeah, that's been good. They're three, essentially they're machinists. They're 3 engineering types. So the one is much more maker. He does a lot of stuff. They're not just talking about machining. Well, that's quite interesting. They're just 3 ordinary people. They're very down to earth. Don't seem to. None of them are big on YouTube or Instagram yet. Maybe they'll get bigger. But they've kind of met each other online and got to know each other quite well. And they started at the start of this year to do a podcast, and it's been quite interesting. A couple of them. I mean, episode 6. I was walking the dog listening to it. I think it was episode 6, and I was literally sort of walking up the street just laughing my head off at one point. They have some good discussions, particularly about things like gear. Do you buy a new lathe made very cheaply, or do you buy something that's 100 years old but maybe needs some work to get it done? Which do you do? Which is the better way of doing it? Hopefully one that's going to sort of grow. I unsubscribed from a couple of podcasts recently, and that kind of gave me a nice gap fill. So certainly one to recommend. Particularly one for perhaps the UK listenership more than American, but I think it probably does transfer quite nicely. But there is some stuff that's very British.
You can't have subtitles on a podcast.
No. Well, actually, you might be able to, because I think they might be on YouTube as well.
They are, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it really. I caught up with that. 2 days it took me to catch up with the first 8. So very much recommended. Next week we have Heidi.
We do.
Heidi next week. It is next week we have Heidi. Yes. Special one next week with Heidi. Special for another reason, but we'll get to that next week.
It will be, yeah.
And I think James after that.
It is indeed.
Yeah, we've got some good guests coming up.
But we've also had a good guest tonight.
We have had a very good guest tonight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, Morley.
Where can people find you, Morley?
You can find me, I would say primarily on YouTube. It's where I put the most effort into making things. So my channel name is Morley Kert. I'm at Morley Kert on Instagram and Twitter, Morleykert. I also have a website, which I hope to put a new page on. For a big project that I hopefully will get to do this summer. Morley Kert everywhere, MorleyKert. But I put all the misspellings in the tags, so if you misspell it, it'll probably still come up.
So Morley Kert, Kert can get to you.
Morley Ken.
Do you still have Yelrom as well. You're on.
I own the domain, so it'll point to my current website.
Nice.
And they can listen to you as well on.
Oh yeah,
Clamp.
yes.
And-
I do a weekly maker style podcast with Grant Alexander and Adam Mackey called Clamp, the Creating, Living, and Making Projects podcast. And then sort of less regularly, I do another podcast with Ryan O'Connor called Into the Spotlight, on which Andy has been a guest, where we talk
episode 11.
Yeah, where we talk about the creative process and just more general creative things. He's similar in age and mindset to me, so if you like where I'm coming from, you'll probably like that podcast.
I will. So, I mean, you don't put out as regularly as Clamp. I do follow Clamp, but I do. I will say it now publicly. I find Into the Spotlight is one of my favoured podcasts.
Thank you.
I think the last few episodes have been. I like how you guys think, and I like that you think about the stuff that you're talking about, and it comes through in the discussions that you have. And I find that refreshing.
Thank you.
But,
Yeah, I mean, I got to give a lot of kudos to Ryan. I think he's a very good, like, I don't know what the word is, the relationship that you guys have, co-host. He's a very good co-host for me.
Foil
yeah.
is another phrase.
Yeah, and he can be a little more methodical and make sure to like cover all the bases that we plan to. But yeah, I love our conversations. I feel afterwards I'm always very inspired to create, and he's a positive guy. He's hopefully coming back to Toronto within the next couple months, so we'd like to collaborate on some projects together in person, especially like that require multiple cameras and multiple brains working together.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Right, on that note.
Yeah, thank you again, Morley.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll say goodbye to folks.
Yeah.
So,
Goodbye.
bye, folks.
Bye.